Thank you for joining us, everyone. Welcome, welcome. And we have some people joining over Zoom. This session will be recorded so that you can share with your friends later and use it as a resource. We've got a lot of cool insights and learnings in this presentation. Cool. Let me just double check. I can do this. Okay, cool. My name is Eric Don. I'm the community manager of the Podcast Garage at KQED. Thank you all for coming. This is a great turnout. We've got a great presentation tonight about an interview podcast called Life in 7 Songs. But who is here at KQED for the first time? Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And then who is here for the Podcast Garage for the first time? Nice. Thank you. And one last question. Who here has a podcast? Raise your hand. Cool. If you want to introduce your podcast in one sentence, I will open that up in like a few minutes. But I'll just tell you a little bit about the Podcast Garage. So I work for PRX, which is a nonprofit media company, and we support the work of storytellers and journalists and multimedia makers. We do that through distribution on radio and through podcasts. So we do that for This American Life, the Moth Radio Hour, Reveal, Snap Judgment. We also have an independent network of producers through the Radiotopia network, such as the Kitchen Sisters, Ear Hustle, etc. Articles of Interest is a popular one here. We also have training programs, and we get funding from different groups that are interested in putting cohorts of storytellers, journalists through accelerator programs to help them refine their podcast and take it to the next level. And we also have a community building initiative called the Podcast Garage. It started in Boston out of a Jiffy Lube, and we decided to keep with the spirit of the auto shop by calling it the Podcast Garage. There's a classroom in there, as well as a recording studio. And so people would come in to record, track, do their stories, and some people would come in for classes on audio editing, storytelling, interviewing, etc. And so we've been doing that for about 7 years. 2 years ago, KQED started renovating this building, and they wanted to make it more community facing. And so KQED and PRX decided to collaborate together. And so I came here to start doing these workshops. And the goal of the Podcast Garage is to get people together, get them to learn from one another, share resources, and potentially collaborate with each other. So we're always trying to find innovative ways of gathering people and also starting new projects. So if you have ideas, let us know. We're always open to feedback. Okay, so who would like to share what their podcast is about? Raise your hand. Just like a brief description. Hello
Hi,
there.
everybody. My name is Bita Nazem Kelly. I have a podcast called Modern Persian Food, and we have published over 160 episodes. Hey. So fun. So I have a co-host. Her name is Bita as well, and we chat about Persian ingredients, recipes, and also culture and identity. So check it out.
Awesome. Thank you. Another one over there.
Okay. My name is Kristen Grannon, and I have a podcast called Raw Female. We take a unfiltered look at midlife and beyond through a Q&A and a chatcast format.
Thank you. Awesome.
My name is Madison Alvarado. I work with a nonprofit called the San Francisco Public Press, and we have a podcast called Civic that just looks at different news issues that San Franciscans face and community-based stories. So, yeah.
Thank you, Madison. That's awesome. So yeah, again, trying to get people, making this like a live bulletin for people to share stuff. Cool. So we'll continue here. Today's agenda, we're doing the intro right now, and then I'll pass the floor over to Sophie for our workshop tonight, and then we'll have mixture and refreshments after. Resources for podcasters. Many of you have seen this before, but we want to encourage you to check out the Association of Independents in Radio, AIR. They have a great website. They have a newsletter that shares all of the upcoming online, hybrid, and in-person events for podcasters, audio makers, audio engineers. They do a lot of great programs, and they have a database of freelancer tools on their website that folks can check out, especially for independents. Podcasting 101 series from the Google Podcast Creator Program. We worked with Google, produced these 10 videos, short videos to tell you the design process for thinking about your podcast, how to connect with your audience. There are like different Mad Lib exercises that they run you through. And so you should check that out if you want to get back to the drawing board and think about how to refine your podcast. And then transum.org, they've been around for a while. They do a lot of work to support podcasters through their website. They have articles on the business, the art, the craft of podcasting, what kind of equipment you should buy, the technical side, and upcoming things as well. And they worked with PRX to produce a Sound School podcast, which is a podcast about learning how to podcast. So you should check that out too. And then recording studios near us, we got WAM, Women's Audio Mission. They do a lot of great work to promote women in the industry of audio engineering and audio making. They have 2 studios near us, a few blocks away. BAVAC, Bay Area Video Coalition, also has a space, and that is free for SF residents. KLW, they have a studio in the radio station. And then Pyramid, did you add that?
I added that.
Nice, thanks.
That's where we record.
Yeah, so Pyramid on Jeff Adachi Way, so check that out. Yeah, so we're always updating this, trying to figure out what are the local resources that's helpful, especially post-pandemic where, people are recording at home or going to different places. So if you have any resources you want to share, let us know. Great. So tonight you're here to listen to this presentation that Sophie Bearman put together for us. Sophie is the Director of Special Projects at the San Francisco Standard. The SF Standard is a digital news media organization that focuses on local news for the San Francisco Bay Area. And one thing you should know is that they have a flagship podcast that just came out that's called Life in 7 Songs. And it is created, produced, hosted by Sophie Bearman. And so today, Sophie will talk about how she makes a podcast. So basically, in each episode, she interviews someone influential, famous, an amazing person, and asks them for 7 songs that mark or left an impression or is associated with big moments or milestones in their private or public lives. So yeah, there are like a lot of raw tape, hours of raw tape. How do you get it down to 30 minutes? And then, you're interviewing like these big time people. How do you navigate that? And then she'll also talk about the workflow, as well as why the SF Standard is interested in making this podcast in the first place. So without further ado, please welcome Sophie Bearman.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, there's so many talented people here. I hope all of you can host one of these. So thank you for coming. I'm really excited to do this, especially because we only have 4 episodes, which pales to what I've been hearing, but hopefully good ones and many more to come. So just the agenda for this workshop, what I'm thinking is I will introduce the podcast again, although Eric did a great job summarizing what it is. Introduce myself, how I came to be the host of it, and then pretty much soup to nuts talk you guys through our process for making an interview podcast. But my hope is that we can pause a lot for questions. There will be time for Q&A at the end, but I think we're a small enough group that you can stop me. We have a number of mics, so please, I'll pause after, maybe not every slide, but in natural places that feel good. And please do ask questions because I really want to make it useful for you all as well. So we can always redirect based on the questions that you have. And we will also listen to some things closer to the end of my presentation, but you'll get to hear the trailer at least closer to the top. So if you haven't heard the show, which is totally fine, you'll get a sense of what it sounds like. Cool. So what is Life in 7 Songs anyway? I guess quickly, has anyone had a chance to listen? We only came out in June, so okay, so like a smattering. Essentially, and I guess to step back, like Eric said, I work at the San Francisco Standard. We are a local newsroom here in San Francisco. We're about 20 journalists and then some other supporting staff on the social team and marketing and what have you.
And I was actually the Standard's first editorial hire. So I've been with them since we started in January 2021. And then we rebranded to the Standard in October 2021. So we're brand new. And my role for the bulk of that time was as the director of multimedia. So I led our photo and video departments at the Standard, but always knew that I wanted us to have a podcast. We just weren't ready for one because, as you all probably know or will learn, it takes like quite a bit to pull a podcast together. So anyway, that's the Standard. But Life in 7 Songs is a podcast where I get to interview what I call some of the world's most fascinating people, which is like millions of people, really. So there's a lot of people to choose from. But what that means for us is tech leaders, business leaders, writers, artists, musicians, comedians, what name you. And it's a biographical podcast. So in about 30 minutes, they talk about their life. It's not just like how I built this. If you guys have ever listened to that podcast, which is a great podcast, which is more like how I came to be the CEO of Airbnb, right? It's more like how I became me. So it's a little bit more personal and intimate, although of course we do touch on their careers as well. And the twist is that they bring 7 songs that mark milestones in their lives. And often people will choose like a lullaby that their mom sang to them, or the first song that they heard on the radio that they were like, oh, I'm a tween now, or some whatever. love songs, whatever it is. They always surprise you. So that's the show. I thought it might be helpful to talk a little bit about why the Standard is making this show, because I've heard feedback that like it's unexpected, which I think is good. And I had a hand in helping to choose what show we would make and what I could host. And so I think the obvious podcast that we could have made was something akin to The Daily or The Journal, maybe for San Francisco, right? Like a daily, we did not have the bandwidth for that. Or let's say a weekly news show. And that's maybe something we'll do, and I think a really good idea, and there's space for it. But we also had a number of like constraints, I guess, that we were working within. And I think this is useful for everyone thinking about launching a podcast, is like really being frank about what levers you're working with. For us, we have reporters working really hard every day just to like get their stories up and do their investigations and be on top of their beats. And so with a news show, most likely we would have wanted to interview those reporters. Even in a weekly format, I felt like we may not be able to deliver the quality I wanted every week, pulling people away from the stories that they were working on. And so even there, we were like, I don't think we're ready, and that's okay. So that left either interview format, which is a great format. It's easy in some ways, and we'll hear, hard in others. And ours is pretty heavily edited, but it's a little bit easier. Or like a serialized podcast, like Serial or In the Dark or something. But we don't have that story yet. So if any of you have ideas, so obviously you need like a story that can command a 12-episode serialized podcast, and we aren't quite sure what that is yet. So maybe down the road, the Standard will make something like that. But that sort of left, those were like the constraints and things we were thinking about. And then our goals at the Standard, being a fairly new newsroom, were also to grow our audience. And so our hope was that people in New York or Chicago or Kansas or Europe or wherever might also enjoy this podcast. So broadening it beyond just like a San Francisco audience. So we interview, like I said, a variety of people. Some of our first guests were San Francisco Mayor London Breed. We had Johnny Ive, who is the former chief design officer for Apple. He was at Apple for 27 years. And left a couple years ago to found his own design collective. But that's like maybe not a no name, but the man behind like any Apple device ever. Alongside Steve Jobs, he's the man who helped make, the Apple Watch have its curved edges and whatnot. So that was a great interview. We had the music producer Dwayne Wiggins, who is an incredible musician himself. With the band Tony, but also has produced people like Beyonce and Zendaya and Destiny's Child, and helped other people find their voice. So those are the sorts of people that we interview, and many more. And the goal for each episode, so hopefully if you listen, you'll feel this way, is to walk away feeling like moved, I think, and that you've learned something new about otherwise like very well-known people. Like we've heard London Breed talk a lot, most of us being from the Bay Area, but like we haven't heard her talk about Candy Girl by New Edition and her like playground crush. And it's like disarming and very cool and humanizing. And obviously there's places, and the Standard does this, and KQED and Forum, where, she would be held accountable or asked about her policies, of course. But on our show, it really is about getting to know another side of people through the music that they bring. Okay. I said a little bit about this. Just briefly, I thought it might be helpful to share how I became the host of this podcast. A lot of times people ask me like, oh, are you a musicologist or a singer? No. My own mother told me I had a very bad voice. I do listen to music, and I really think that's all it takes to be a guest on the show. And I try to tell my guests that. I interviewed Robert Reich. He's the former Secretary of Labor under Clinton, and a professor at Berkeley, and talks about wealth and inequality as well. But he wrote me back, and he was like, I'm not a music person. And I was like, you don't have to be like, what is that? You don't have to be a music person. It's just like, and I give examples. It's like, for me, again, I always say, like, my dad, I was raised by primarily my father, single father, and he used to sing a certain lullaby. And when I sent that in an email to Robert Reich, he was like, oh, I get it. My parents used to play Hoagie Carmichael on the radio and dance to it, and it taught me something about love. And I was like, okay, and we're off and running. So I'm not a music person. Our guests don't need to be music people. That being said, my background is mostly in video. I went to Harvard. I studied documentary filmmaking and worked for our school newspaper. And then after graduating, was like, I need a job. Documentary filmmaking seemed a little bit scary to go into. I wasn't quite sure where that would take me. So I found a job kind of combining those two in video journalism. And I ended up at TheStreet.com in New York City on Wall Street. It's Jim Cramer's financial news company. I spent a lot of time at the stock exchange, and then from there ended up at CNBC, and so built kind of a career in business news and video, and was at CNBC for 4 or 5 years, helping grow the digital video team. Eventually, I felt that I wanted to leave business news behind, as great as it is. It wasn't for me long term. And I went to Columbia Journalism School, and they have a Master of Arts program in politics that I took. And I was working on my thesis, and it was really like the story just screamed podcast. I'd never made a podcast in my life, but the woman that we were telling the story about was deceased, but there were a lot of rich voices that could talk about her. And it just screamed audio to us. And we ended up getting, my partner and I, Ellen Horn, who's the former executive producer of Radiolab, was our mentor and thesis advisor. And we managed to turn that thesis into a podcast that is out in the world called Admissible. It's a 12-episode investigative podcast into a malfeasant forensic scientist in Virginia. And we sold it to Virginia Public Media and iHeartRadio. So I learned a lot pitching that and in that process. And that was the first podcast I made. And then after graduating, I hung around. I worked at Jigsaw Productions, which is Alex Gibney's production house, on their flagship podcast, Lies We Tell. And I freelanced, just put in an example for Last Scene and a bunch of other places, and kind of got my feet wet in audio, but was still pretty new to it. And then, like I said, I came to the Standard, and for the first couple years worked on just like getting the Standard up and running. and just kept wanting to get back into audio. And finally now we've been able to. So that's just a little bit about me. And now I thought I'll play the trailer and then we can pause if we have any questions before I keep going.
I could never find a girl to dance with me, so it was a sad moment for me.
Is there a particular song that comes to mind?
Absolutely. Thought you'd never ask.
If you had to choose 7 songs to help tell your life story, which ones would you choose?
In the song, it says, "Why not leave? Why not go away?" We really just left and never looked back and started a new life in California.
I feel like the biggest loser in the world. Like, I can't put her through this. It's just really hard because I loved her. So to get the courage to break up with her, I would play that song.
When the song talks about seeing the same sun or stars or moon, that was something we did all the time. My parents would call me from prison and say, "Hey, can you look out your window? Do you see the moon?" I'm looking at the same moon right now.
I make the decisions, I call the shots. That should never be diminished because I'm not a man, I'm a woman, and I run this city, and I am 100% that. Next song.
Life in 7 Songs is a new podcast from the San Francisco Standard, launching June 18th. I'm your host, Sophie Bearman. We'll hear from some of the world's most fascinating people as they lay bare the milestones and the music that's made them who they are. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I know it's early, but any questions so far? I can keep going. Yes.
It seems like it's the obvious question. How did you come up with this concept of 7 songs? Curious.
Great question. So that credit goes to the San Francisco Standard's funder and co-founder, Michael Moritz. He is a former journalist who covered Apple and Steve Jobs way back when, and then had the foresight to go into venture capital and was with Sequoia for a long time. And he helps keep the Standard up and running, which is amazing. He is Welsh as well, although he's a longtime San Franciscan now. And the BBC has a podcast that is not dissimilar to this, to say the least. It is called Desert Island Discs, and it is an amazing podcast that is similar, and on top of everything we are kind of doing, they also send their guests to an imaginary desert island and ask them to bring a luxury item and a book. So there's more going on, but the idea of telling a life story with music, I have to give credit to the BBC, and it's like no one was doing it here. So our funder, Michael Moritz, said, should we do something with that? And I think the format is, and if you'll listen, hopefully you agree, is very revealing. And so we thought that we'd take it on and try it here stateside. Yes. 7. I like 7 songs. Like, it sounds good. So that's one reason. And then also, we kind of wanted the episodes each to be about 30 minutes. And I think it's really nice when you listen. That means you hear a song like every 4 minutes, and it just, like, the songs make the show. Like, I mean, the guests are amazing. I'm at the bottom, and but the songs, like, if you start to fade, like, they're just this incredible pick-me-up. And you'll hear later some clips, but, like, it's just so good. So we didn't want to space it out too much, pretty much. So 5 might have been, like, too many gaps. And then I'll talk about, like, we're doing a lot, like, asking people to tell their life story and talk about 7 songs. And because we are fair using our music, they need to, and I'm not a lawyer, I will say that a lot because I have to, but they need to provide a certain level of commentary on the music to make us be able to use a certain length. So you'll hear in our podcast, not every song is 15 seconds. It really depends on the quality of that commentary and an ongoing conversation with our lawyers who help us figure out whether it rises to merit the length that it is. And so when they talk about the music, we actually have to, talk about it. And so what I'm trying to say is it's a lot to fit into a 60-minute interview. So 7 is like, sometimes I'm like, it's too much, but we try to make 7 work. Yeah. Yes. One more question. Yeah.
Here's the mic. When you think of the kinds of fascinating people and guests that you're looking for, how did you guys decide how wide of a net to cast, and how did your first guests meet that mark?
Such a good question. And if I'm being candid, I think we're still figuring it out. Originally, I was pretty passionate that it should be Bay Area people because we are the San Francisco Standard, and it just felt like a guidepost for me as the person not only hosting, producing, and also trying to book. And so our first guests, you will see, all have a Bay Area connection. Obviously, the mayor, Dwayne Wiggins, is from Oakland. Johnny Ive, Apple. Margaret Cho, the comedian, grew up in San Francisco. That being said, since and in future episodes you'll hear, we have broadened it, which is kind of scary for booking. The thinking being, going back to the goals for the podcast, that we want to sort of make the Standard a publication kind of akin to like New York Magazine, maybe, where like, of course, we cover our local market, but we could also do something else. Like this is our big experiment. And we think like you don't have to necessarily have to have been born in San Francisco to be super interesting. And so we're experimenting with broadening it. But we'll see where we net out. Thank you for the question, though. It's a tricky one. Yeah, cool. Okay, let me keep going. These were all really good questions. And they weren't really in my slides, so keep them coming. Okay, so I thought it might be helpful just to delineate like who's working on the show, because I know some of you are making podcasts and might be curious about team size. So at the Standard, it's a team of 1. It's just me. And then I have an incredible senior producer who's part-time in Rochester, New York, who... her role, she's like my second brain. She sits in on every interview, and in real time, we have a Google Doc, like writes in all caps, like new questions. And occasionally if I'm like, I'm mostly in the room with the people I'm interviewing, so I can't really respond, but like once in a blue moon, I'll be like, or, like have an emotion, and she'll respond and calm me down. So she really is like, we have 2 brains in the interview room. But beyond that, she also, is in the tape alongside me doing back and forth in Descript, and then eventually we pass it off to our engineer who's working in Pro Tools. And then we have a bunch of Standard editors that are more in like a supportive role. They listen to cuts and weigh in at various stages as well. But essentially we are a team of 3. Yes. Yeah, the question was, what did I mean by Standard editors? I just mean like our executive editor, John Steinberg. Yeah. Yes, exactly. No, not in tape at all. Yes, and one more question. Do we also do social media? We don't have a Life in 7. Well, we have it. It's not like up yet. We grabbed it, so don't go taking it. But we haven't launched our like Twitter or X or Instagram yet. We're just starting slow in some ways. We promote it on the Standard's Instagram, X, LinkedIn, etc. But we have those, so it's a bandwidth question. I think so. Yeah, and I should have mentioned that we are bi-weekly, meaning we come out twice a month, which was another strategic decision, basically having to do with the team that we had and wanting to keep a certain quality bar. And hopefully one of our goals is to revisit at the 6-month mark. I think many of you also know, like, podcasts, it's not like a movie launch, or at least I tell myself this, where it's like, out of the gate, that first weekend, it's either like a blockbuster or not. Like it's a slow burn, and it's word of mouth still very much so. I mean, we are doing cross promos and including with KQED and all that good stuff, but it takes time for word to spread. And so I'm not like, I think we're seeing great numbers, but I'm not discouraged. Like they will grow, and we'll evaluate. At the earliest I would recommend is like 6 months. You need to give these things time. Then I'll be on maternity leave. So hopefully maybe when I come back, we might increase it to weekly if the Standard decides that we want to, and it's working for us. So our whole approach was to start, I think, a little bit more cautiously so that we weren't ever undoing anything, but we had room to grow. What did I want to say here? Oh yeah, I just wanted to share some stories. We're reaching out to lots of busy people, and one thing I've learned along the way is that it really helps if the guest wants to do it. I think that's kind of a weird thing to say, but like some people say yes and then drag their feet and they don't get their songs to us until the day before. And I've just learned to I need the music at least a week before to do a good job. And then you get someone like Margaret Cho who sent hers like right away and was excited about it. And that makes all the difference. So just something to think about. You don't want anyone to just do it because they feel forced. They need to, again, they don't need to be a music person, but they should be enthusiastic about the concept. And then the other thing I look for is people have to have a certain level of openness about their lives. Like it is personal and biographical, and we're talking about their childhoods. And of course, like I tell everyone before the interview, like I may ask a question, you don't have to answer it, and that's okay, but I'll still ask. And they can set their own boundaries. But if you're, not even willing to talk about like, I don't know, your parents at all, it might not be the show for us to work together. And that's okay too. Some people just don't want to cross into that, and that makes sense. Okay, so this has been a big learning for me. For Admissible, which was the crime podcast I worked on, and most of the other shows I've ever worked on, I'm not necessarily interviewing like famous people. And so pre-interviewing, like, do you guys pre-interview for people who make podcasts? I used to do it a lot. Like you get on the phone, you talk through, sometimes, yeah, you make people comfortable. I don't get to do that anymore. So that's been an adjustment. And often I'm talking to the guest for the first time when we sit down together, either in person or occasionally we do over Zoom or like remotely as well. And so there are some challenges associated with that. For my prep, what I do is I get the songs a week ahead, and not only just the songs, but they send like an annotation, which I ask for. So they'll say like, I listened to this age 7 or 8, and it means this. Now those annotations come in varying levels of detail and quality, and sometimes that's all you get. So sometimes I feel like I'm guessing a little bit. So I guess the point I'm making is there is a level of preparedness. Like I prepare as much as I can, and then I also expect to be surprised. One example I'd give was interviewing London Breed. What I try to do is form a thesis for every guest, and like knowing that could change, but just so I have a direction and an arc in my mind. And so for her, I looked at her music and I looked at her life story, and I said to myself, this is a woman who takes being mayor personally because she grew up here, and the issues that she's still fighting really hard, that she faces, that are hard to fight, like she grew up with. And she grew up in a housing project, a 15-minute walk from City Hall, and had, experienced housing insecurity and mental illness with her aunt. And so a lot of the themes that we still see in the city, like they're not new to her, but they have changed. That was kind of my thesis. What she brought, which I didn't expect, which was so cool, was so feminist. She had chosen all female. I missed it because she didn't explicitly say it, but she had chosen female singers. And a lot of what she wanted to talk about was being a female mayor, and, you know, what that has meant to her, and, you know, seeing Salt and Peppa like break into the rap scene as women, and that they could do the same as these men rappers. And so we kind of like, in the moment, and I only had 60 minutes with her, like 60, like her, you know, they're texting me like, wrap it up, like her aide, literally. But we like, you know, we didn't talk about it, but in my mind, I was like, okay, we're like weaving these together and it's happening in real time. And I hope that if you listen to her episode, you'll hear both of our themes, you know, like we're true, like they're, anyway. Yes, that was a long-winded discussion of how I prepare. I put all my questions in a Google Doc, and Jasmine listens in and types in all caps and helps me think on my feet as well, because we only have sometimes 60 minutes. That being said, I do not do any interviews for less than 60. It can't be done, in my opinion. Yes.
Oh, why don't you have time for pre-interviews? Is it your constraints and your guests' constraints?
It's not mine.
Okay.
I would happily do them. It seems to be the guests. Often I'm just talking to their publicists or comms folks, and it's already a lot to ask, like giving them homework. I mean, I think some people, the songs come quickly, but again, I'll say London Breed sat down and she was like, that was hard. You know, like I'm like, she was kind of not annoyed, but she was like, that took time. And so with the homework that we already assign, I just haven't had success being able, I don't anymore. Yeah, I've built a system where I don't ask anymore. Sometimes we go back and forth on the music. Like if I'm really not getting it, I'll write back, like with Robert Reich. We had a really nice back and forth, and I asked a question and he explained, and yeah, that helped. But there's not a lot of space for that, I've found. So no, it's so tight on time. So like, in my opinion, the best length for this show is 90 minutes. Some people are able to offer that, but even then it's like, that's the max I seem to get. So I'd like to use all of that for the interview. I mean, obviously I'm not just like, okay, tell me about your mom or something. Like you know, there's like some chit chat. And you know, we're in person, so like there's a tiny bit, but I try not to use my time for that. And yeah, yes.
A couple questions. Chesa, right? Chesa was interviewed. Yeah. That was a comment. I do have questions about that, but offline, just in terms of how you choose your guests, and do they know about prior guests, and how that whole, how the standard, lots of questions about the standard actually. But my question was, do you go to them or do they come to you, your guests?
So far, we've been doing the outreach to our guests just because it's a brand new podcast. I hope.
I mean, physically for the interview. Oh. Like, did you go to UC Berkeley for Chesa? Do you go to
we do most of our interviews at Pure Mind Studios in Soma, which is just a small studio I found when I was doing my research, because the Standard doesn't have studios. I'm so jealous of KQED. And I love to interview folks in person. I think that's way better. But some people aren't in San Francisco, and then we do it remotely. So far, London Breed and Johnny Ive and Dwayne Wiggins were in person, and Margaret Cho, who lives in LA, was at her home in LA holding her tiny Chihuahua, Lucia. And she's done podcasting before, so she recorded her audio on her end. And sometimes we have sent a tape sync as well when folks don't have their own setup, or sent people to studios if they're in like New York or in a place where that's easy to do. So we've kind of done it all. We have a big backlog. You're sort of bringing up Chase Subudin. That's someone I interviewed. We have a backlog of episodes that we will release, which is because I'm going on maternity leave, and we wanted to make sure that the podcast can continue. And so we've been working hard on it since January, and therefore have more than what you've heard, which is great, and will run out at some point and like every other podcast be under the gun. But for now we're a little bit ahead, which is nice. Cool. Thank you for the question. I kind of covered this. Time constraints. I wanted to talk about, so we play clips of the songs in the room with the person. I get this question a lot. We don't play the whole song because that would take up too much time. But beforehand, I try to keep it to 30 seconds, but sometimes the music just wants to go longer and it's like 45. But I choose a section of the song, and I control what I play it at some point when we're talking about it. And that's great because I explain to the guests that they can sing, they can talk over it. In edit, it's all separate tracks, so we add it back in so they can really interact with it. And that's so important because sometimes they almost always listen and then have something even better to say, or if they're like Dwayne Wiggins, you'll hear like he's like talking about the music, like whatever that moment, or talking about the minor chords and whatnot. So that's really cool. So I just wanted to also say one of our, I guess, standards at the Standard, or one of the things I really wanted is for the podcast to just like be really good, which everyone wants, but I wanted it to sound really good. And I never wanted any guests to have like worse audio than anyone else. Like I wanted the listener never to be like, hear that tinny Zoom, just because we are talking about life stories and we are publishing twice monthly. So like, let's do it really well. And so in the case of our interview with Johnny Ive, who was hard to schedule, we had a date in April. It was April 1st, and I was still learning. We decided to do it at their office to make it easier for 60 minutes. And essentially, I didn't do a good job vetting the space, and there were some running late things going on other sides, and time was limited. It was down to like, we had 45 minutes probably for the interview, and we were in this beautiful, as you can imagine, highly designed, cavernous, like it was like a church. The echo was wild. And Johnny Ive was in the room, and I made the call to not do the interview, which was like, I think I like cried after. I called my mom or my dad and was freaking out. Like, are we ever going to get him back? That being said, I do know that he is a person who appreciates quality. I think that's something we've all probably learned from Apple and from my research. And it felt like we just can't do this in the time we have left in this echoey room. And it took some time, but we did eventually rebook for June 13th. It was stressful. It was 2 months, 2.5 months later. And unfortunately, so close to launch. I'd hoped to include him in our, first episodes, but I still think it was the right call. And so obviously, like, we're all making different podcasts, and frankly, like, I think listeners have adjusted to so many different sounds. Like, I'm not sitting here being like, you have to like interview people in person with fancy mics. I don't think that's true at all. It's just the show that like we wanted to make, and that's one example of a tough call. And I don't think you'll hear it that well here, but I found some funny audio of us in this like fancy designy cavernous space where I'm like poorly reading the intro, and I sent it to my senior producer, and she was like, no, it's really echoey, but you can't, I played it. I couldn't hear it as much, but we'll listen. And then I'll play a clip from the final interview that we did. This week, we're joined by a guest who has likely had a profound impact on your life. Sir Johnny Ive is the former chief design officer for Apple and is the mastermind behind devices we cannot imagine living without: the MacBook, iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, AirPods, and more. Johnny joined Apple at just, I have to fact check this, 25 years old, and together with Steve Jobs, transformed what was a financially troubled company into the creative juggernaut it is today. Testing 1, 2, 3. I think we can just send that and see what she thinks. So yeah, it's obviously like wasn't meant to ever be heard, but it was very echoey. Of course, you can do a lot in edit, but between that and the fact that we only had about 45 minutes, we just made the call to skip it. And this is just the beginning. I chose me talking. You all want to hear Johnny Ive, but go listen to it because I'm trying to compare the two audio. But he's more interesting than my intro. You're listening to Life in 7 Songs, where some of the world's most fascinating people share how they found their way and the songs that helped them through. From the San Francisco Standard, I'm Sophie Bearman. This week, we're joined by a guest who has likely had a profound impact on your life. Sir Johnny Ive is the former Chief Design Officer for Apple and is the mastermind behind devices we can't imagine living without: the MacBook, iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, AirPods, and more. Johnny joined Apple at just 25 years old, and together with Steve Jobs, spent decades transforming what was once a financially troubled company into the creative juggernaut it is today. I just faded out. But we got it done, hopefully with way better audio, and I think it was worth the wait for our show. That's just a judgment call. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I love this discussion of quality. I think definitely as a listener, I notice when like the audio quality is consistent and I'm like, oh my gosh, this high profile person is being interviewed using just their laptop microphone on Zoom. This is like crazy. So I'm just wondering, how do you kind of maintain that quality when you're dealing with, guests that might not have a lot of experience or like comfort around audio and audio equipment? Like, are you sending them things, then having someone kind of walk them through, or how do you
Great question. Let's see. When we can, we try to get people into the studio so we can control it. And then when we haven't, I've had a lot of luck sending people to just nearby studios, but that's a cost, right? I mean, that's not an option for everyone. For us, I will book a studio in New York or Atlanta or whatnot. And then it turns out a lot of these people do have like a lot of fancy setups or good enough. So in that case, we'll just get a sample and make sure that we're happy with it. I haven't ever yet sent a kit, but I'd love to learn how to do that. I don't quite know what that kit should be. So if anyone has advice on that, come find me after. I'm actually not like a audio expert myself, and I don't know that we have the team to really figure. I'd love advice, but we haven't had to do that yet. But yeah, that's a good question. And I definitely don't want like our 7th episode to randomly have Zoom audio. Like that doesn't seem fair to anyone, to follow nice audio. I want everyone to sound as like rich and whole as they can. Yeah. Did you have a question?
You mentioned that you select the 15 seconds of audio from the song, but do you always do that? Have you ever had someone say, well, there's actually like a really specific part of the song and a line that resonates with me that they would rather have played instead?
Yeah, such a good question. So the longer the annotation, the better. I love people who send me like paragraph explanations. And a lot of the time, so when I explain the show to people, I explain like, if you're a guest, here's what we're looking for, specific lyrics, and so sometimes they'll say like, in Chandelier by Sia, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like that, you know, whatever. And so then I'll like obviously choose that part of it. But especially with like classical music, some of the songs are like 15 minutes and I'm like, I don't know. So in that case, I ask the person, I'm like, is this the part that you were into? And in person, sometimes they'll say yes or no. And then in edit, if the answer was no, we'll use the section that they liked. So, or sometimes I'll get it wrong, but like they'll say something and then we'll go back and listen to the song and be like, these lyrics speak so much to that. You know, like even if they didn't call out the specific lyrics, like we'll find the part of the song that speaks to what they were saying. So it's kind of like changes and edit a little bit, but yeah. Cool. Okay. So just really quickly, our interviews are like 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the guest. And then I use Descript. Does anyone use Descript? Know what Descript is? I love it. I don't even have Pro Tools on my standard computer. And Descript is a program, for those who don't know, where you basically add your audio, it transcribes it, and then you can like listen and highlight whole sections and like gray them out, and then they just like disappear. So like let's say you start with 90 minutes, you can just like X stuff out and move stuff around, and then it becomes 35 minutes. I'm not sure I'm explaining that well, but it's an editing program that anyone could use, and it's very affordable. So I highly recommend it, and you can collaborate in it. So Jasmine and I, like, I'll make a draft, a first pass, and then she'll listen and duplicate it and go in and make a second pass. And we do that until we feel like we have, and we'll even add the music. You can add like outside clips to Descript until we have what we think is close to the episode. At that phase, we'll share it with those editors I mentioned who come in and listen and sometimes have feedback. And then eventually we pass it off to our engineer, Michelle, who's working in Pro Tools to, make it, I don't know. I don't work in Pro Tools, make it sound amazing, which she does. And we do a couple passes in Pro Tools as well. Okay, I'm going to keep moving just because I'm aware of the time and wanting to leave questions at the end. So now we get to hear some of the show, finally. I thought folks might be interested to hear how the music interplays with the conversation. I specifically chose 3 clips that, if you're listening carefully, are different lengths of songs, different interaction with the music. And I won't be hurt if you think some are better than others, because that's kind of the point of this exercise, is, again, going back to the quality of the commentary, how well I did as an interviewer in following up, getting enough commentary, that all has bearing on how the final episode sounds. And I tried to choose examples that kind of show that range of, I think, success. So I hope we can talk about that freely. But yeah, so Dwayne Wiggins, let's take a listen to this one.
My brother Raphael.
Except I'm going to let it not skip.
My brother Raphael and then Tim used to come over once they got out of high school, and that's where that's where Tony as a 3-man unit came, because we sit there and watch MTV and Soul Beat, and we just jam in front of it all day. And it was just me with hella guitar pedals, bass, and all this. To this day, I tell people, don't take these fun things you do in life for granted, because they turn into things. But it turned into something, because the 3 of us, we were like the Black Police. You know, it was funky. It was we didn't sing much, but we'd have cool hooks. But we would just jam hard for hella long. We didn't know how to write songs. We didn't know song structure. We just knew we were about to jam. And that's where Tony came from, his original sound.
Okay, we talked a little bit about finding your sound. Is there a particular song that speaks to you?
I think it was Imagination.
Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Yeah. First of all, I hear the different changes it goes through. And then what I really love about it is the ride out. and Philip Bailey just takes it away with his high falsetto. So we used to listen to that, how they took a song and it started real mellow. You listen to the end of that song, and he's singing, he's screaming, and it's just, yeah, it's out of here. You look at Al Green. Al Green, when he sings, you think Al Green went to vocal lessons to sing like that? Hell no, it's him. You think James Brown went to vocal? No, it's him. And so your own distinct sound and personality is what makes you.
So that's one example. There's 3, so bear with me. They're all about a minute and a half. Margaret Cho.
Well, I was a hardcore raver, so I love Delight. And I love this song, Groove is in the Heart, because it's so many different things coming at you sonically. It's really sophisticated and complex. It's so 90s, but in the best way, that we were like embracing all these different types of music and mashing it up. But I love it.
Yeah, it's funk and house, and it has a lot going on.
So good.
Your groove, I do deeply dig. No walls, only the bridge. My supper dish, my succotash wish. Sing it, baby. I couldn't ask for another.
Whenever I hear that, I can taste that part of the song. And it's so, that is such a synesthesia moment for me.
You said you were a raver.
Yeah, it's sort of like when drugs are sort of celebratory, which I think is really fun. Like, you know, the reason people do drugs is not just to escape and not to just to further damage themselves. Sometimes there's people that do drugs for fun, which I wish that I could do that. There's not an ability there anymore to do that because I've had such a history with it. But if there was a time that sort of encapsulates the celebratory like quality of inebriation, it would be like this song and the area that this song sort of encapsulates, that sort of 90s glee. I wish I still had that, but I don't. But it's nice to revisit, and you can revisit it always with music.
Yeah. Okay. And this one you might hear is a little shorter.
Well.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I picked Lizzo, Truth Hurts, because it is a real, I think, woman anthem. And because I feel like based on everything I've done as mayor, as supervisor in any role, I've demonstrated that the buck stops with me. I make the decisions. I run the show. I handle whatever it is that I'm here to handle as mayor. And that should never be diminished by attributing it to anyone else, especially a man, because I'm not a man, I'm a woman, and I run this city, and I am 100% that. Next song.
I just took a DNA test, turns out I'm 100% that bitch. Even when I'm crying crazy, yeah, I got boy problems, that's the human in me. Bling, bling, then I solve them, that's the goddess in me. You could have had a bad bitch, not committal, help you with your career.
Love that song.
You're running for re-election this November. I mean, why do it all again?
The thing that makes me feel energized about doing this job is the fact that things are looking and feeling better, and all of the work we've been doing is finally working.
So I guess my question for you is, like, which worked the best? What do you hear differently towards the top and the end? I think some are more successful than others, so I'm curious what you guys think. Yeah.
Well, to me, it's interesting when you say you come up with a thesis for each episode, because with London Breed, it seemed to be about her. And with Margaret Cho, it seemed to be more about, and Dwayne, it seemed to be more about taste and more about what they thought about the music. And I wondered, you know, how do you approach that? Like Desert Island Discs seems to be more about taste a lot of the time. I'm just curious how, you know, what you think about that.
Yeah, such a good question. I think that a musician like Dwayne Wiggins, he can talk about the music. I mean, I can't talk about music like that. Like, I'm not sure I have the vocabulary, even if it's making me feel those things. And so to a certain extent, I try to adapt to what the guest is bringing. And I love Dwayne's clip. Like, I love the interplay. And when that happens, when a guest is able to do that from a perspective of using the music, we can use a little more. That's maybe what you heard, because when they comment specifically on things like, like certain ways that the guitar is being picked or the falsetto, it's speaking specifically to a moment. And that's hard because it then makes every episode a little bit different. I don't think it's better or worse. It's just how folks kind of can talk about the music. And in the London episode, because of the time constraints, you may have noticed there wasn't an opportunity for more commentary after. That's just because I didn't have time to be like, what do you think? What do you feel when you hear that? Which I tend to ask, and so we just had to move on, which I hate. I always want more time, but sometimes you have to make do with what you have.
This is kind of similar, but what the London Breed clip made me think about is what kind of thesis your guests are coming in with. And so I wonder, when you have someone like London Breed, who's a politician who clearly, is coming in, wanting to get reelected, wanting to curate this kind of view of herself as this, feminist figure, is what do you do with that? And what are you doing in the interview room to make that more of a casual interview versus I don't know if you've had a bunch of politicians on the show, but I'm sure it applies.
We
to
cut a lot.
Other people. Yeah.
We cut whole stump speeches. I swear to you, that, and it's hard. That being said, everyone has a narrative, but sometimes it's more pointed. And I appreciate a narrative. I actually like when folks have a clear idea of the story they're telling. When it's Johnny Ive, it's he chose a lot of songs that were extraordinarily simple, like The Police, do da. I can't say it. What is someone? Anyway, I'm gonna get that title wrong, but I think he had a narrative and it was helpful. I think it's challenging when you are interviewing someone in office, and that was something that we weighed, and ultimately I felt like, beyond the fact that there is an election happening, she is a mayor of a major city and a trailblazer just for being mayor, and the Standard and KQED and the Chronicle and the Times can and do also hold her accountable every day. So I tried to just remember to do what I think my podcast does, and know that same day, we publish many stories on different things and continue to do that and are hosting a debate in a couple months, etc. So knowing what the show can do and what it can't do, I think is important. And I hope that our listeners will ultimately see a library that's wide and broad enough to kind of get that, hopefully. But I do think that some people have a stronger narrative than others, for sure. And I also don't think it's good enough when someone's just I loved this song. That doesn't do it for the, it should have, when Margaret Cho, she chose again, Sia's Chandelier, that song helped her find sobriety, that specific song. And so it's better when there is a story connected to it. And when you are saying something, whether a team of people helped you come up with that or not, it does help, I think. But I appreciate the question because it is complicated and I grapple with it as well.
Let's take maybe one or two more questions. We got Richard over there.
Good evening to you. Thank you for your time tonight. The biggest question I have, what's the timeline? As in, when did your idea start? When did you start reaching out? And even for interviews, what's that time in production like? When is the episode ready to go? How many mixes do you guys have? How many bounces do you have? When do you know, okay, it's done, I don't want to listen to this no more, put it out there? But also, even you talk about a backlog, If you don't mind me asking, how many episodes are backlog?
Great questions. Okay. We started thinking about this podcast in October 2023. I took 6 months off and hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. It was awesome from April to October last year. And I came back in this new role and we started thinking about it very loosely. Probably by December or January, we knew what show we were making. Remember, I was mentioning like news, serialized. We spent a while just trying to figure out what the podcast could and should be. And then I also spent a while learning a lot about fair use and whether we could make the show and felt that we could take on the risk. Once we decided that, I started to reach out. I will say that the guests have evolved. Like, it's really hard to book for a show that doesn't exist. And I think your question maybe was touching on this as well. Like, I started really local because that's who I could book. And now we're booking like huge people. Like I can't share, but like really big names. And so it's kind of, I've learned a lot. I don't know. I'm still reflecting on that, but like we have a backlog and of probably, I think we have like 8 others done, which for a podcast that comes out every 2 weeks is a ton. And again, I'm off for 6 months coming up soon, so we need that. As far as how fast we can turn an interview, we have successfully and like pretty easily done it in 2 weeks. So Johnny Ive, which is our 3rd episode, we turned in 2 weeks. Like, it wasn't crazy. And we also actually just turned Margaret Cho in 2 weeks. So I think if we needed to, we could do it in a week. But it's, you know, we haven't needed to yet. I'm sure we will. Well, hopefully not. And in terms of how many passes we do, I would say we go back and forth in Descript. Like, the first cut maybe is 40 minutes, and either I will do it or Jasmine will do it, and then we'll trade. And then there's another cut that will get shorter, and then maybe I'll go again. Like, we might stop there, or I might take it again and swap. We go back and forth, maybe 3. Then we'll share it with some like producery type or like editors who weigh in, and then we might take one more pass in Descript, but it's all pretty quick. Like, if the feedback comes back fast, and then in Pro Tools we'll do about 2 versions, and then we QC, and you know, there's little tweaks here and there, but easily we can do it in a week or 2 weeks. Yeah, does that answer your question? Cool.
Yeah. My question is, do you foresee a case for whatever reason that you do the recording and just don't see how you can put out a show for whatever reason? Sound quality or the narrative is too strong. What would you do like in that case?
Yes, I think it could happen. It might happen. We haven't crossed that road yet. That's kind of what I was alluding to. Anyway, we'll see. But, you know, there's no guarantee that we make to run it. So, unfortunately, I think that could happen. It hasn't happened yet for technical reasons, which would be a huge shame. I'd feel really bad about that. I hope it never does. But I think it could happen, but it hasn't. You know, we're still figuring out the order of everything. Yeah.
All right, everyone. We're going to go on to the mixer portion. Please give a round of applause to Sophie Bearman, please. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you. So we'll be sticking around. We're going to put some food out in the back, some appetizers. Help yourself. There's some drinks in the water cooler. If you have any questions, please come up to Sophie. And I think we have one more slide. Yeah, that's yes. Learn more at lifein7songs.com. That's where you can find all the places you can subscribe to the podcast and share on social media. Scan that QR code to find the podcast. And stick around, please. Again, use the name tags, talk to each other, introduce yourselves, and hopefully find ways to collaborate. Enjoy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, guys.